A girl of 10 sat on a window seat with the curtain pulled shut in front of her and a book open on her knees, and a boy of 14 dragged the curtain back and put out his hand. He said, "Show the book." She went and fetched it. Then, holding it, he read her the account. "You have no business to take our books. You are a dependent, Mama says. You have no money. Your father left you none." Then he threw it at her, and she went down against the door with her head cut. She was 10 years old, and she had just been handed an itemized valuation of herself by a boy reciting figures he had got from his mother at the breakfast table. That is page 1. The novel is Jane Eyre, published in 1847 under the name Currer Bell. Everybody knows the shape of it: a poor governess, a rich man with something locked upstairs, a fire, a wedding. I want to point at what the summaries leave out, because it is not an interpretation, it is printed on the page in money. This book will not stop putting a price on its own heroine. £15 a year at the school, £30 a year at the great house, £20,000 in a solicitor's letter, and a man on a Yorkshire hillside asking her, out loud, "Perhaps now you will ask how much you are worth." 4 people in 400 pages set a figure on Jane Eyre, and no two use the same method. Was she fighting to be valued higher? Or was she fighting about who gets to do the valuing at all? Today, in 20 minutes, I'm reading Jane Eyre in Charlotte Bronte's own words from the first edition text. A 10-year-old was told what she was worth before she was told anything else. 2 servants carried her upstairs and locked her into the room where her uncle had died. They called it the Red Room. Red hangings, red carpet, a great dark bed, and nobody had slept in it for years. She sat still until she dared to move, then had to cross in front of the looking glass and made the mistake of looking into it. Here is exactly what a 10-year-old saw in a mirror. The strange little figure there gazing at me, with a white face and arms specking the gloom, and glittering eyes of fear moving where all else was still. She does not recognize herself. She reports the child in the glass the way you would report a stranger. I think that is the most important sentence in the first 50 pages, and not because it is frightening. It is the first time in the book that Jane sees Jane from the outside, which is, structurally, exactly what a valuation is. Somebody stands where you cannot stand and files a report on what you are. So why was she locked in there in the first place? Because she hit back. John Reed had hit her for years, and she had never once returned it. And the one time she did, the household arrested her for it. Notice who gets charged. Not the boy who threw a hardback at a girl's head, the girl who bled. And I want to be precise about what makes this hurt, because it is not the cruelty. Cruelty is the easiest thing in the world to write. It is the bookkeeping. Every meal she eats and every stitch she wears has already been entered in somebody's ledger as a debt, and a 10-year-old can feel it being totaled in the room. Have you ever sat at a table where somebody was quietly adding up what you cost them? She screamed. They came, and her aunt pushed her back into the room and turned the key again, and the child fainted. Weeks later, a school was arranged, and before the carriage came, Jane did something nobody in that house had ever heard her do. She finished a sentence. Her own account of why comes before the outburst, and it is not an apology. Speak I must. I had been trodden on severely and must turn. What came out was not a plea. It was a statement of fact delivered by a 10-year-old to a woman with total power over her. How dare I, Mrs. Reed? How dare I? Because it is the truth. And then the part that matters for everything that follows. You think I have no feelings, and that I can do without one bit of love or kindness. But I cannot live so, and you have no pity. Read that again as an argument about price. Mrs. Reed's whole position is that Jane can run on nothing, no affection, no kindness, because her requirements are lower than a real child's. That is not hatred. That is a costing exercise, of the kind an employer does when deciding which role can absorb a pay freeze. And Jane's answer is not "I deserve more," which would accept the terms and haggle. Her answer is, the arithmetic is wrong. I cannot live so. Something odd happens to her afterwards, and she is honest enough to record it. She feels enormous. Then, within a page, the elation drains out, and she is a small child alone in a room. She won, and it changed nothing about her circumstances, and she notices both. That is the pattern the whole novel runs on. She keeps refusing the valuation, and refusing it never once makes her richer. 80 girls sat down to breakfast at a school in the north, lifted their spoons, and put them down. Burnt porridge is almost as bad as rotten potatoes. Famine itself soon sickens over it. That is Jane's line, and the detail she gives you is not the taste. It is the spoons moving slowly, each girl trying and stopping. Nobody had breakfast that day. Here is the figure. Sitting on a bench, Jane asks the obvious question, and another girl answers, "Do we pay no money? Do they keep us for nothing? We pay, or our friends pay, £15 a year for each. Then why do they call us charity children? Because £15 is not enough for board and teaching, and the deficiency is supplied by subscription. £15 a year, and it is not enough, so she is a charity child and will be reminded of it daily." That is the first valuation in the book with a number on it. The man who runs the school arrives to inspect. He sees a girl with curling hair and orders it cut off. "Naturally, yes, but we are not to conform to nature." And then, "Miss Temple, that girl's hair must be cut off entirely. I will send a barber tomorrow." And while he is saying it, his wife and daughters walk in wearing velvet, silk, and furs with false French curls. Bronte does not comment. She puts the two things in one room and lets you do it. Then he catches Jane, stands her on a stool in front of the school, calls her a liar, and issues the order. Let her stand half an hour longer on that stool and let no one speak to her during the remainder of the day. His stated philosophy is on the record in the same chapter. The point of the school is not to accustom them to habits of luxury and indulgence, but to render them hardy, patient, self-denying. Translated: your deprivation is not a cost we are imposing, it is a benefit we are conferring. Every institution that has ever underpaid anyone has used that sentence in some form. He is charging her £15 for it. A girl called Helen Burns stood in the middle of that same room, being punished for untidiness, and she did not look upset. Jane asked her how she could stand it, and Helen gave the answer that Jane spends the rest of the book failing to take. Life appears to me too short to be spent in nursing animosity or registering wrongs. Registering wrongs. She is describing a ledger, too. She has just decided not to keep one. I do not think the novel agrees with Helen, and I do not either. Jane never manages it. She registers every wrong in the book, in order, with the words people used. That is literally what the novel is. But watch what Helen does, because she is the one person in 400 pages who never attaches a figure to Jane at all. When typhus came through the school, Jane found her way into Helen's bed at night, and Helen, dying, noticed the wrong thing. "Jane, your little feet are bare. Lie down and cover yourself with my quilt." A girl with hours to live, worried about someone else's feet. And then, "I am very happy, Jane, and when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve." They found them in the morning, Jane asleep with her face against Helen's shoulder. Helen had been dead for some time. She was buried without a stone, and it was 15 years before anybody put one there. Here is why that matters. Every other relationship in this book comes with a rate attached. What Jane costs, what Jane earns, what Jane is worth marrying. Helen is the control group. She is what the others would look like with the pricing removed. And Bronte kills her in chapter 9, which tells you how long she expected that to last. 18 years old, she sat down and wrote an advertisement and paid to have it printed. And this is the moment the book quietly hands her the pen. She had been teaching at Lowood for 2 years on the same £15. The reply that came back offered a place with 1 pupil, and it named a figure. The salary is £30 per annum. Double. She says so herself when she asks permission to leave. that the new place would pay double what she was getting. I love that she does the comparison out loud. She does not say the work will be more meaningful or that she needs a change. She names the old number and the new one is twice the old one, and that settles it. Nobody offered her that. She advertised for it. This is the third valuation in the book, and the first one Jane performs on herself, and I would argue it is a bigger structural event than anything that happens with Rochester. A boy told her she owned nothing. A school told her she was worth £15 and still a charity case. A man in black told her that having less was a gift he was giving her. In every one of those, the figure arrives from outside, complete, with a person attached who is very sure of it. And now she writes a number down and posts it, and a stranger in a different county reads it and agrees. Have you had that moment? The first time you named your own rate instead of accepting the one on the offer letter? There is a particular terror in it, because the number you write down is a public claim about yourself, and if nobody answers the advertisement, that is an answer too. Somebody answered hers. The place was called Thornfield. A horse came down hard on a frozen causeway in a lane, and its rider went down with it. Jane was sitting on a stile in the cold when it happened, and she notes the surface precisely. A sheet of ice covering the causeway. She offered help and was refused twice, and then the man had to take her shoulder to get himself upright, and he leaned on her the whole way back to his horse. That is the first time Edward Rochester appears in this book. He appears as Wait. The popular version of this novel has him arriving as a dark, brooding force, and her as a small, pale nobody. And the actual text opens their relationship with him needing her body to stand up. He did not know who she was. She did not know who he was. Nobody was performing. Months later, she woke at night to a sound in the corridor, walked into his room, and found this. Tongues of flame darted round the bed. The curtains were on fire. He was asleep in the smoke and would not wake. "Wake! Wake!" she shouted and shook him, and he only murmured. So she stopped shouting and used the basin and the water jug and put out a bed fire by herself in the dark at 3 in the morning. Twice now, the powerful man in the big house has needed the governess to physically hold him up. And in the middle of all this, Bronte drops in one small line where Jane, smiling at one of his orders, thinks to herself that he seems to forget he pays her £30 a year for the privilege of giving them. She is keeping the account open. Even here. Especially here. She lost her temper under a chestnut tree in an orchard, and the proposal happened because of the temper, and not in spite of it. He had spent weeks letting her believe he was going to marry somebody else, and that she would be sent away. And when she broke, what came out is, from the first word, an argument about worth. Do you think I am an automaton? A machine without feelings? And then, do you think, because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. He proposes. She accepts. That night, the chestnut they stood under is struck by lightning and split down the middle. And Bronte puts that at the end of the chapter without a word of comment. Now watch what he does next, because this is the part that gets skipped. He takes her to a silk warehouse and starts buying, and he tells her what she is going to be. I will attire my Jane in satin and lace, and she shall have roses in her hair. That is an upgrade, a man raising her valuation as high as he can reach, out of love, sincerely. And she refuses it flat. And then you won't know me, sir, and I shall not be your Jane Eyre any longer, but an ape in a harlequin's jacket, a jay in borrowed plumes. She talks him down to one plain black satin and one pearl gray, and then does something almost nobody notices. She keeps the job. She will go on being the governess, earn her board and £30 a year, and buy her own clothes out of her own salary. He is offering to make her worth more. She is telling him that the offer and the insult are the same shape. Being priced up is still being priced. The clergyman was already reaching towards them with the question half out of his mouth when a voice at the back of the church said, "The marriage cannot go on. I declare the existence of an impediment." Rochester did not turn round. He told the clergyman to proceed. It did not work. He walked the whole party, the lawyer, the stranger, the bride, back to the house and up to a windowless room on the 3rd floor, and showed them what he had kept there for 15 years, and named her. Bertha Mason is mad, and she came of a mad family. I have to say something plainly. The language this novel uses about that woman is the ugliest thing in it. She gets no case, no history in her own voice, and no scene where she is anything but an obstacle. That is a real hole in the book, argued about for a century and a half, and I cannot do it justice in 20 minutes. So I am telling you it is there and moving on with the debt visible. What happens next is the hinge of the novel. He asks her to stay anyway, not as a wife, the wife exists, but with him, abroad, kept, safe, loved. Every material fact is on his side. No family, no money, no character reference, nowhere to go. By any honest accounting, the offer is worth more than everything else available to her. She goes anyway. And the sentence she holds herself together with is not a comfort, it is an order. I care for myself. The more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself. In the orchard, she had already put the principle in one line. And note the punctuation, because almost everyone gets it wrong. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. She walked out before daylight with 20 shillings and slept outside for 3 nights. A clergyman stood on a hillside with his back against a rock and explained to her what she was for. He had taken her in when she was starving, taught her, worked beside her, and gone through her like an audit. God and nature intended you for a missionary's wife. It is not personal, but mental endowments they have given you. You are formed for labor, not for love. Read that as a performance review, because that is its grammar. Not personal endowments, mental ones. Therefore, labor, not love. He has assessed the asset and assigned it, and then, you shall be mine. I claim you, not for my pleasure, but for my sovereign's service. Claim. He is not asking. He is exercising a right over property he believes was allocated to him. Her answer is flat and factual. I am not fit for it. I have no vocation. This is the 4th and cleverest valuation in the book, because it does not insult her. It praises her, capable, serious, useful, and then uses that praise to file her under a heading she did not choose. Now put that beside what he told her a few chapters earlier, holding a solicitor's letter. Perhaps now you will ask how much you are worth, and the answer was £20,000. She thought he had misread it. He had not. It is written in letters, not figures, 20,000. And here is what she does with the largest number anybody has ever attached to her. She cuts it by 3/4. She has 3 cousins, so £20,000 shared equally would be 5,000 each. Justice, enough and to spare. And when he argues, she is blunt about why. It would please and benefit me to have £5,000. It would torment and oppress me to have 20,000. Every one of them handed her a number, and the only number she ever kept was the one she wrote down herself. A blind man stood in the rain outside a house in a wood with his hand out, feeling for weather he could not see, and a woman he thought was dead put a glass of water into it. Thornfield had burned. His wife had gone off the roof. He had lost an eye and a hand getting the servants out, and the fire had cost him everything the book had spent 400 pages listing. It is you, is it, Jane? You are come back to me then? And her first substantive sentence to the man she loves, after a year apart and a house burned down, is a financial disclosure. No, sir, I am an independent woman now. Independent? What do you mean, Jane? My uncle in Madeira is dead, and he left me £5,000. His response is the most honest line he speaks in the novel. This is practical. This is real. It is. She did not come back to be rescued, and she did not come back to rescue him. She came back with a figure of her own, and it is the first conversation between them where nobody is doing the pricing. Then, the sentence Bronte spent the whole book earning. Then he stretched his hand out to be led. The last chapter opens on the most quoted first line in English fiction. Reader, I married him. Not he married me. Not we were married. The subject of that sentence is her, and the verb is hers. 10 years on, she reports the result. And it is not romantic, it is structural. I am my husband's life as fully as he is mine. As fully. Not more, not less. That is a ledger balanced at last by the only accountant she ever trusted.